Welcome back to the Mike Huckabee Show. Senator Lamar Alexander is former governor of Tennessee, served in the United States Senate now. He is also a former presidential candidate. And he is one of the most recent and maybe vocal critics to say it's time for Kathleen Sebelius to step aside. Senator, great to have you here, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Mike. I understand you slipped into Nashville the other day and played your bass guitar.
You know, I was hoping I could do that anonymously because if I go to Nashville and play, it's truly like a little leaguer going to Yankee Stadium and swinging a bat. I mean, you know I don't belong, but it sure is nice to say I played Nashville.
Sure is fun, isn't it?
It is.
I hear you did well.
Well, we had a great time. Ricky Skaggs and the Isaacs were out of the event, and we just had a terrific time, and I love Ricky, and anytime I get to be on stage with people like the Isaacs and Ricky Skaggs, even if I'm not qualified to do it, I'll jump at the chance.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey, I want to ask you, because today Kathleen Sebelius appeared before the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Were you in any way maybe thinking that, oh, she's okay, she really stepped up there and answered those questions?
Well, as a person, she's okay, but she should step down. I mean, you've been a governor, I've been a governor. There's governing is about governing, and there's supposed to be accountability there. The example I think of is Admiral Hyman Rickover back in the 1950s when he created the nuclear navy. He told the captains of the ship, he said, "You're not only in charge of the ship, you're in charge of the reactor. And if anything goes wrong with a nuclear reactor, your careers are over." And we've never had a death from a nuclear reactor on a Navy submarine ever since then. So there has to be a principle of accountability even in public life, and the Secretary should be accountable for this miss, and she should step down, and someone else should take charge.
It appeared to me today that the Democrats have sort of circled the wagons. They don't want to answer the hard questions about security and privacy, about the workability of Obamacare itself, but just to say that Republicans just don't want people to have insurance. Now, I know that is absolutely not true. It's not true for you. You've presented ideas. I remember the day that you tried to present some to the president, and you actually had a stack of them, and he looked at you and basically said, "We won."
No, you're right. I mean, that was the healthcare summit a few years ago, and I had a chance to represent the Republicans at that summit, so I had 7 or 8 minutes. So I not only talked about what was wrong with his proposal, which was that it was expanding a health care delivery system that already costs too much, but that what we Republicans would do, and that was, in general, to turn the train around and head it in a different direction, which was more choice, more competition, so we could reduce costs so people could afford to buy insurance. And it looks like that what we were saying 3 years ago is turning out to be very true.
One of the things that I found remarkable, President Obama having said now for all these years, even before he was elected, if you like your insurance, you can keep it. And now even NBC has said he knew for 3 years that absolutely was not true. I mean, I think all of us could have looked at that and said, well, there's no way that could have been. How damaged is his credibility over this?
I think it is damaged. I mean, he said that one of the arguments we had at the healthcare summit, he and I there, was I said that premiums would go up, the cost. He said they wouldn't. Well, they have. He said you could keep your insurance. Well, people aren't able to. And just in the first few weeks, just in California, our staff has counted up in California and Florida and one other state, 1.4 million people are losing their insurance because it will be canceled on January 1 because it's not legal under Obamacare, which is 10 times as many people in those 3 states who have signed up for insurance. And then you have a whole group of people who have insurance through their employers, insurance at work, which is about half of Americans who aren't seniors. And employers are seeing the cost of health care under Obamacare being so much that they're dropping their insurance, and those employees are going to have to find their way into Medicaid or into the exchanges. So lots of people are losing their insurance. The website is not the biggest problem with Obamacare. The rising costs of premiums, the cancellation of your policies, the lack of choices of doctors, being forced into Medicaid, and the Medicare cuts that were part of Obamacare that were used to expand the program rather than to make Medicare more solvent. All those are bigger problems, and people are going to begin to understand that over the next few weeks.
You know, I know that your call for the resignation of Kathleen Sebelius was not one that you made half-heartedly, nor lightly, because you've been a governor, you've been a United States Senator, you were also a cabinet secretary and ran the Department of Education. So you understand government from soup to nuts, and I think that it's not something you would have called for if you didn't think it was necessitated. In your mind, what is the primary sort of cause for which Kathleen Sebelius should have to walk the plank?
Well, the first cause is the website. She's not responsible for the enactment of Obamacare. That is the president's responsibility. But the website has been there for 3.5 years. It's the way you get your insurance. After January 1, everybody's going to have to buy insurance or be fined, or even worse, not have it if the website doesn't work and you can't get on it to get into the exchange. So the failure of a website with 3.5 years to prepare is something that someone has to be accountable for. And if it's not the president, it has to be his cabinet secretary.
There was one startling revelation that came out of the House Ways and Means Committee. That is that there was apparently no performance bond placed on these companies that developed the website. And I'm thinking, my gosh, every contract we ever did at the state had a performance bond. They had to somehow prove that they could do this, or else we wouldn't be out the money. And it looks like we're out the money. We get nothing.
Yeah, it does. And you mentioned the state government. I remember, a small potatoes example, but when I was governor, one of the big issues was whether we could get a big construction job done in Knoxville before the World's Fair. Mm-hmm. And so the way I did that was I hired a very good person, put him in charge, asked him for a plan, and then I met with him once a month for him to report to me on whether we were on time and on budget, because it was important to me. Now, the president has a signature issue. That's called Obamacare. I can't imagine that over the last 3.5 years he hasn't been meeting on a regular basis with his principal person for accountability, the secretary, and saying, are we on time? Are we on budget? Will people actually be able to buy it if we're going to require they buy it or be fined by the IRS? So this is a real failure in management and accountability by the president and by his secretary.
I can recall when Y2K was approaching and everyone was nervous. The fears were that the whole country would essentially shut down. The electric grid, mm-hmm. Banks would not be able to process information and checks. And there was an extraordinary amount of anxiety. And I can recall having meetings every week with our IT people and with all the agency heads about, are you ready for Y2K? Are you ready? And on the night that it was changing over, we were at the Capitol from 7 o'clock that evening till past midnight. We had the National Guard on duty. I mean, it was all hands on deck just in case the worst happened. Well, it was the most significant non-event I've ever been a part of. But we were prepared for anything. And it's almost like this president wakes up every day saying, wow, I didn't know that. And the answer to every issue repeatedly has been, well, I didn't know that till I read it in the paper. Senator, I find it hard to believe that the President of the United States, with all the thousands of people whose sole job it is to make sure that he's informed, doesn't know these things have happened until he, I guess, goes out on the front lawn of the White House and picks up the Washington Post and reads it at breakfast.
Yeah, well, with all respect to the president, he seems to be a good father, and he is a smart man. But he's not had the kind of training that you did in 12 years as governor of Arkansas, or that I did as governor. Those jobs are much smaller than the difficulties of being president. But you do learn something about executive responsibility. And he doesn't seem to have much aptitude for that. I mean, you would think that even with all he has to do, that if he's got one big signature program, and he's got 3.5 years to get ready for it, and he's going to be remembered in history for how it does, that he'd be all over it once a week with somebody in charge. What I learned as governor was you put somebody on the flagpole. If you give the job to everybody, well, nothing gets done. But if you say, Secretary Sebelius, this is your accountability, or captain of the nuclear submarine, your job is the reactor, and they understand that, and you meet with them regularly, often things get done, and that the president doesn't seem to be very good at that.
There is talk that some Democrats in the Senate want to put together a bill that would give the president virtually sort of a carte blanche on debt ceiling, and it would be an automatic increase. There's clear pushback from Republicans. Mitch McConnell has said there's got to be some spending cuts in there. I can't imagine that getting anywhere. Is that a serious proposal by the Democrats, or do you feel it's just some posturing they're doing?
That won't go anywhere. I mean, the debt ceiling is the right time to talk about fixing the debt, and the way to do it is perfectly obvious. At least those of us who've been working on it here, we've got this 60% of the budget with mandatory automatic spending like Obamacare that's going out of sight. It's going up 74% over the next 10 years. Then we got the other part of the budget that we appropriate, military, cancer research, those things. It's under control. So we need to reduce the spending on the out-of-control part and move some of that over to the military part and other parts. We all seem to agree on that, but it's up to the president to try to engineer that in the next 2 or 3 months. And again, if you were governor of Arkansas and you had that problem and you saw that the parties were about 1 or 2% apart, I'll bet you could call the legislators in and work that difference out. Well, the president needs to do that here, but he doesn't seem to have much aptitude for that kind of leadership.
Any predictions on, do you think Kathleen Sebelius will step down, or will she stubbornly stay in place?
Hard to say. I think it depends on how much heat the White House feels. But I think it would be better for the president, better for the country if a new person were in place and doing their best to fix the law we have in place. I mean, if you think about this, the law says you're supposed to buy insurance by January 1. Most people will buy it through the website to go on to the exchanges. And if we don't have it fixed until late November, that means you've got just 2 or 3 weeks to get insurance, because it takes a couple of weeks for the companies to process your application. And if millions of policies are being canceled on January 1 because they're not legal under Obamacare, you can see the problem that this causes around the country. So I think a fresh start would not only be in the country's interest, in the interest of those people who are having their insurance canceled, but it would be in the president's interest to try to rescue his program.
Senator, it's always my pleasure to visit with you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Hope we can visit again soon.
Thank you, Governor. Congratulations on the success of your program.
Thank you.
All right.
Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee visiting with us here, and we'll be back in just a moment. You are listening to The Mike Huckabee Show.
The Mike Huckabee Show.